Okay, well, they're going to keep filtering in. Just want to welcome everybody to the 6 p.m. and last session of week 1. Been a great week in terms of content, in terms of presentations and speakers that we've had. But really pleased to welcome Daren Fridge to the summit. Fridge and I met quite actually a long time ago when I was playing out in the WLA for the first time, and kind of stayed in contact, run into each other at nationals and some other places. So it's been great. Been able to follow Fridgie in terms of where he's gone on in terms of coaching, scouting, and things like that. And I first reached out to him and said, like player evaluation, you're a scout, you do a lot of things with different organizations, and a lot of mutual friends that we have in those organizations and successful ones. So really pleased to have you here today. Thank you for doing this. And I'm going to turn controls over to you.
Right on. Let's hope I do this right. Welcome, everybody. This us here.
Yeah. So just before Fridgie gets started, tell everybody right now, if you have a question, please ask it. Pop it in the Q&A, and I'll be facilitating and moderating that kind of stuff.
Right on. First of all, thank you for having me on. This is a unique time we're in. We're probably all feeling very similar, particularly box lacrosse people, where we're stuck at home on a computer. And this has been awesome. I watched Joe do face-offs and Rick doing takeaway checks the other day. And this idea is fantastic. So it's a great way to connect with everybody. I am today calling you from Coquitlam, out here in British Columbia. And this game has given me so many rewards, and I'm very fortunate that I've had opportunities like working at the professional level with Derek Keenan and Jeff McComb and Jeremy Talevi have all helped to contribute to this. I've also had the unique experience of reconnecting with former players that I coached back in '99 in Adelaide with Mark Miashta and Taylor Ray, as well as, though I never got the opportunity to coach him because he was away winning Minto Cups, was Matt Brown. I've also had, I got a little female flavor in this where I connected with Katie Rowan, formerly of Wagner and now at Albany, married to Merrick Thompson. Merrick was too busy to give me some feedback, but thank you to Katie for reaching out and providing me some details or some finite details for this presentation. And I just want to give a shout out to all the Ridge people that have contributed to these sessions, and Robbie Williams and Kurt Malofsky, Ryan Keller. In the current setting I'm in, I do serve as the assistant general manager, essentially to the U20 team now for Team Canada. I'm a community coach at U13, and I'm also involved with the junior bellies. I coach my son's teams all the way up a lot of years with Coach Kurt Malofsky, and was part of Team BC Midget. So I feel like I've got my finger in a number of different things, but I will just blast through this. And at any time something resonates with you, please ask the question. So what I'm hoping to get through today will be these topics: what I think makes a great lacrosse player, what am I seeing as an evaluator, what do I want, what have you got, and what can you do? So that's kind of the guiding questions that take us through this. The plan for today, as I mentioned, one slide or the other may take longer than the next, but the key for me is to answer it while we're there. So please let those questions fire if anything resonates with you. So this is what I define as what makes a great lacrosse player, and this has been in my wheelhouse for quite a while now, as far as what I have to do when I'm an evaluator and what I look at. And I've, as I mentioned earlier, got contributions from a lot of people of what I think makes a great player. And I'm going to go into detail with each of these to define what I think what each of these characteristics means. But when skill and athleticism, the top two, are equal, the bottom four make a world of difference. So we could probably find equivalent in comparison between BC and Ontario. We could probably find the equivalent skill and athleticism, but where we tend to get beat is on lacrosse IQ and the ability to adapt. I have had the pleasure last couple weeks back to having Dan Dawson, and I got the chance to coach Dan many moons ago. But anywhere he's gone, I think everybody says the same thing. And these are the 6 characteristics that I think, with Dan in mind, I was able to come up with what truly makes him the total package for me. So skill, this is the first one that really pops out for anyone. Is you know when you see it, you know, it's the soft hands, the stick skills. They can shoot at multiple levels, and they could be a great feeder or have great awareness as far as their vision. And on the opposite end of the field, you're going to have like the stuff that was shared last week or a couple nights ago with Rick Beardsley about they just have that ability to finesse the ball off opponents with their takeaway checks. And you know, Petramala, Brody Merrill in the modern context, and then a whole whack of younger guys that have followed through. But the moment I saw a guy like Robert Church, even as a 9th grader or grade 9 up here in Canada, the way he held his stick, the position, the way he moved when he attracted pressure, you could tell right away he was going to be great. From my Vancouver Raven assistant coaching days, every time we played the Toronto Rock, it was late in the game, and I was like, how are we going to stop Colin Doyle? And whether we shut him down from shooting, he would find a way to feed someone else for a goal. But those star players, the skilled players, the Gates, John Tavares Jr., you see them, you notice them right away. And athleticism. So I was talking before this session began with Brad, and when you look back at old tapes, whether it's MLL or early NLL, and we thought we were running really fast and moving, and we were at that time, the junior, senior, and pro levels have taken this to another level. So like people that hop out at you for speed would be like Joey Capito, Cornwall, like they're likely the most lethal threats in tranny right now. And yes, there are a few more out there, but this combines in athleticism, speed, footwork, that body control and coordination. Kids today are already doing ladder drills and footwork and things that we didn't do 20 years ago. Nutrition, fitness, and lifestyle. So gone are the days where at the legal drinking age, the lifestyle of an athlete where they think they can party as hard as they play, that's out the door. They're chicken and rice, they're vegetables, they're taking care of their bodies, they're really aware of what their bodies need in order to perform, and that's something, again, that's changed over the last little while. And then preparation, mind and body. So Dan talked about previously when he gets to the arena 3 hours early. You know, during a Man Cup, I watched him pregame, and you know he's doing 10 top rights and 10 top lefts, and just that process to go through. They're much better prepared, and their ability to focus is way different. And on the back end, we have huge bodies like Rubish and Corbeil, like some bigger bodies that are able to keep up and get in pathways and soak shots and things like that weren't necessarily there as far as a big defense would go. Lacrosse IQ, and for me, this is the one that is the one I want to test the most during a tryout, and the one is the focus of trying to pick players. Because if we went back to the skill and athleticism, the moment that's taken away or that is equal, we need thinkers. And part of what I need, or what I define it as, is that the anticipation of play. They're always in the right spot. They have that ability to get open or occupy their check or play off ball. So they're not standing there waiting for the ball. In some of our rural areas, those players go to a tryout and they don't know what to do because they can only have the ball in order to create. So that's something that's definitely a noticeable trait of people that don't have a strong lacrosse IQ. The knowledge of the game, they can ask good questions. They know who the opponent is because they can watch film nowadays or get on YouTube or pay attention to it. And in the olden days, we would go and watch, right? Going to games was a big deal. So as far as what would be in detail for you, the thing that I notice is when players lack this ability, there's a subtle, slight pause or a freeze in their play. And during that, the game is going faster than anticipated, and they actually stop. And it's not for a long period of time because they do react, but it's too late, or they're not able to throw what would be a counter punch because their brain can't process what's happening in front of them fast enough, and the game is moving too quickly. Adaptability, capacity, and coachability. So I've kind of lumped these all in together, and you can pick out parts of these that might better suit you. But what's in a player's toolkit? The ability to manage the unknown using the things that you've taught them. How quickly they can adapt to a new concept, and then changing their style of play to match the needs of their team. So we see it all the time, great skilled teams, but those players that are maybe not on a team of, let's say a 23-man roster, we'll go 20-man roster. You got 2 goalies and 18 players. So those players in that 15, 16, 17, 18, those are the ones that are going to fill in, and their ability to have more things in their toolkit, the better it's going to be. An example of what this would look like is if there's a new drill and they can complete a new drill at full speed after a couple reps, like they got it figured out and they can get going. When on adaptability, Dan Dawson originally 6th-round draft pick for the Columbus Land Sharks, and he was a D-tranny player, was not an offensive player, had junior experience as an offensive player, but his ability to adapt over time and grow and soak up, and he gives a lot of credit to Hamley and putting him in a situation where he could develop. When he got to Victoria, he was unstoppable, and he's aging now, but he's still in fantastic shape. And another presentation I'd heard recently, it was from Coach Stagnita, and what he describes as capacity. And in my line of work in education, in the absence of leadership, what do people do? So when we can't constantly be telling, and he's in a unique situation now as a PLL coach, and most of his or all of his players are very skilled and have played at high levels. So it's a little different, but in this, we can only show them to a certain point, and then they're in a game. We can yell and scream, but their ability to adapt themselves, or at least have the capacity to understand what's being asked of them or the change that must happen, is massive. Now, this one is a big one for me, and I know most of this is obvious. They've got that continuous commitment to improve. There's a catchy thing out there about what's your GPA, your grit, your potential, your ambition. So ambition will drive those things. Lots of people have the potential, but do they have that ambition? What happens when they face adversity? So you get knocked in the chin. How do you respond? Do you answer it back? Dangerous Dan Dawson talks about determination and unrivaled work ethic. So we've been fortunate in this last month or so to see the Last Dance with the Michael Jordan influence on that Chicago Bulls team, and we've all seen it, so I'm not going to talk about it, but his compete level was always at the top, and he wanted everybody else to do it. on that grit level. My dad was interviewed many years ago, probably by Steve Ewan or someone in the local media about, if you had 5 players that you could pick to start your team, who would you pick? And he said, I'll take 5 Andy Ogilvies. Now, Andy is skilled offensively, but his greatest attribute is he's physical, intimidating, athletic. He can sort of do it all. For me, in the context of coaching, it's those players that are hurt. They get hurt. They're not dramatic about getting hurt. They sort of growl and make their way off the field, and we've always had those coaches that had unless you're being a little sneaky with the rules and telling someone to stay down just to earn a little timeout. But in cases where the coach has to come out on the floor, we've always had those people. If you go down, it better be worthwhile, because I'm not running out there if you're okay. So get up and get off. Taylor Ray, and I was listening to his podcast today, and he describes it as that competitive spirit. So what drives people when they're limping and bleeding, and there's that soaking shots, they just do it. They don't complain about it. They just do. On a little bit.
Daren, you had a question. It was a couple slides back, but I was just kind of waiting. But question was, what are your mechanics of evaluations for players? Tick boxing, rating out of 10? Like, how do you quantify those?
Well, so when you're trying to evaluate skill, I've seen those spreadsheets when you're. I prefer anecdotal over trying to keep up with what would be like every breakdown of stick skills, shooting, passing. Like it's really hard to track that. Yeah. You will make anecdotal notes to yourself, and whether I use a plus system or a minus system. Another beauty of a guy, Del Halliday, he has a pen with multiple colors, and you can do it that way too. So I think if you focus too much on trying to complete your sheet, you're going to miss parts of that evaluation or parts of that trial. Going in with the stuff we've described, you already know what it is you're hoping to achieve or wanting to see, and that's the sort of the lens I see things through.
Great. Now, after this, I have another question already in the bank. Sure. Here, but it's after. I think after this character slide, probably be best placed for that one.
Okay. Now, I'll go back to and like what I think makes a great lacrosse player. Like there are people that are trying to put values on each of those. Someone I've met recently in the last year, Adam Gardner at Edge Lacrosse, has got a great idea, a great program going, still in the early stages of putting a value similar to what you've described, where, out of 10, they're going to get a point system across the top, and it spits out a total out of say 100. And I don't want to spoil the good work he's doing, but if you're a 90 and above, you're considered a Div 1 prospect. Some of those elements that I have on there aren't a part of Adam's plan, but I am more than interested in the analytics side of this. And if you're one of those people and you want to allow me into your world, I would be more than interested in being a part of that. So character-wise, this is arguably for me, and knowing what I do, working with the Saskatchewan Rush now, it can be a part of it's in your top 3, arguably, sometimes, about the character. And you can talk about character being a part of grit for sure. For me, this is what's at their core. And over the years, we've had those players as far as, what makes a great team guy, and he's a great kid, or he's good in the room, and things like that. These players, in my opinion, ultimately do the things that make you win. And they're not looking for their energy producers, and they know that's their role. From my experience back in the day, we had a lot of people that understood what it was like to be a part of a team and to have function in that. Now with, you know, the notoriety of being noticed and you know, getting your name in the headlines and scoring the goals, we've kind of gone away from that. But these are the players that make us successful. So when I never had the opportunity to coach Sandy Chapman, I've only heard from reputation, but I know when I coached against him, he was those types of guys, or types of people. The Porter brothers that we have out in Maple Ridge, they're just, and it's not about height. It's just about their ability to never give up. They get knocked down, they get picked up. This is really hard to evaluate when you get to tryouts and camps, and that's where you have to count on, in cases where you have time in between making final decisions, this is where you have to check. If you don't know them personally, is to do those background checks. Before we draft players, I've talked to college coaches. Before you talk to that home association coach, you want to find out who they are and what makes them tick. I had a great exchange with Sheets, which is Mark Miashta. At his age, his reference is, would you let them babysit your kids? And at my age now, in 50 on the way to 51, it would be, would you let them date your daughter, right? So either one of those is totally at the core, the type of people that you want to associate with, and you want them in your dressing room. So what am I seeing?
Oh, sorry, let me pop in with that question.
Okay, go ahead.
So at the national level, you got a super talented player, but he's not the best locker room guy. How are you going to deal with the player, and what would your breaking point be?
Well, we see it all the time, right? There's unique personalities, and I guess we don't know what they're like in the room per se, but from a distance, like Lemieux, Claude Lemieux, that is, back in the day, and somehow he has that edge. People would disagree with me, but a guy like Kevin Reed from the Ridge, like he's got a persona on the floor, but you don't know the real person, right? So if he fit in, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, about fits into what you need, you find a way to make it work. And unfortunately, what we're forced to do lately is watch a lot of television, but there are, like, Phil Jackson's ability to make Dennis Rodman fit, Phil Jackson's ability to keep peace on his team. That's an example of the challenges that coaches face today. But if you truly need that piece, you're going to make it work. And I think those that are around will understand that.
Awesome. Right. Thanks. Yeah, that's great.
So quickly, when you get to a tryout, and it will totally depend. Like if you're trying out for the national team versus provincial, it's different. If you're in a community situation and it's about your individual association, you've got to make decisions. And this is just a few examples of things that you got to, as a part of your comparison. So can I, or do I have the time to develop mechanical skills, or the player of they bulldog, like they're a bigger body and all they do is bull dodge and swim move. Are you able to compare, like you're looking at two types of video? Are they apples to apples? In unique situations like the early and late bloomer, typically your people that are trying out, it depends on the age. Who makes a team at U13 and who makes it U18, all those years of development in between can be different. The greatest example I can give in this category, and he was always good, but there were, and this is Challen Rogers, there were times at the tail end of high school and before he hit junior, or the early years of junior, where people had him pegged as a certain type of player, and you look at him now, and without question, he bloomed late, or he didn't have the same offensive opportunities and played a D type role in junior, and he's now a leader and a captain, and at the core of Challen is the strong character he has too. So the work ethic and everything like that builds in it. So that's one example there. The birth month, which you've all heard, but the younger they get, I'm an elementary principal, and we see it with the kindergarten kids. And if they have a December or November, they're that much, like in some cases 8 or 10 months younger than others. As you move up the chain, this becomes less of an issue. And as kids get older, they get caught up and things like that. But depending on where you're listening from, it does have a factor. Now, this one about YouTubers is really my just a label I've given. And I mean, no disrespect with it, but they learn how to play lacrosse by watching YouTube is my easiest description. And they can have all the skills in the world, but you put them in a game situation, they can do all the tricks with sticks and all, regardless of what you think of that. When you put them in a game, the timing of when they do that finesseful trick or in the context of play, it's useless. So be careful if you're evaluating just from a highlight reel. We go through the progression here with the national team where it starts with video. The benefit of Brownie and Taylor Ray and Merrick, Mark Miashta, Sean Wilkie, like they're at the college level. They already know what they're looking for and who's out there. So the baseline that we're working from, we know in preparation for Ireland, is that who's going to beat Stathakis. He's at DU. He's had a successful time and sorry if I'm saying his name wrong, but he is a fantastic face-off guy that's at Denver, and that we have to find a comparable that can either create a loose ball or jam him so that we can get the wing players in there. But that's the one. Another example would be the Brennan O'Neill kid, who's a big body left-hander. Which defender is going to be able to match his speed and his size and shut him down? So going into tryouts, that is already very clear and set in mind. With this next one, I mean, like these kids are the same age. So before I get to the next slide, it'll make sense when you get there. This was Pee Wee. I did midget or bantam and midget with a similar group of kids. But when we went to Ontario the first time, we had in our mind that Ontario was going to press up on us. We need goalies that could throw the ball. And you could see the size of our BC goalies. And I'm not, taking a shot at what BC 2s are in comparison to Ontario 2s, but they clearly had a different model than us. They found the biggest kids, passing and all their, pants and bodies and like in general, they're bigger. So this is just a photo I had and an example of things where sometimes we speculate about what we need, but until you're actually in it and experiencing it, you have to change your plan. And in Pee Wee, it was not even close in the gold medal game. And we've had better battles over the years. So what do you want? And this is the part where, the chicken and egg, like what do you want kind of meshing with what do you have? So the system or the plan or the preferences, that's very clear. For the men's national team, this is a template or an example of what I want to show you is you have two goalies, though we travel with three. The third goalie knows going over or going to the tournament that there's a high likelihood that they're not going to participate. They're the practice goalie. They're a part of this activity or experience, and that's that. The D, they can fluctuate between, 4 stay-at-home D and 2 LSMs. Most defensemen are athletic enough. They've got experience playing LSM or not. That big bunch in the middle. So the 10 in the middle, how do we divide that out? We have to remember the value of what Tyson Bell and Latrell Harris had for the most recent national team performance. Their value in that short stick defensive midi and the system that was playing, it's off the charts. They could sub off an offensive player, they stay fresh. It's kind of that OD system that we're used to in box lacrosse. But Tyson Bell and Latrell Harris were difference makers, because when teams try to dodge on them, they would jam them up and be able to do it. Also in that mix are face-off players. So the importance of, in Canada's case, they took Jeff Snyder and Jake Withers, the veteran and the younger, moving towards things. 06, USA didn't think that way, and they had no answer for Jeff Snyder. They know Jeff Snyder now. They may not have known a lot about him before, and they definitely found out who he was in the 06 championships, but that value of the face-off. So finding two and having two is very important. And then the last bit, just about, you know, these are the skilled guys. And whether you have 3 and 2 or 2 and 3, and one's just a man-up specialist, it doesn't make that much of a difference. But these are your 5 best sticks. And attackmen have all got to be skilled, and they all have, in potential, they got to shoot the ball or be a feeder, and those are obvious things. The box lacrosse mentality or thinking. So we can blast through this because the slide makes, or should make, sense to you. But you got 8 offensive, 10 defensive in a junior and up system, or you're running a 6-6-6, which was like Walt Christensen, Chris Hall times, where, you know, this 6 designated defender, 6 tranny, and 6-0, so 2-man system out of the D would create offense. It doesn't matter, but you got to know what it is you're trying to run. And then when we can't play OD, which we don't need to go on a sidebar about that, is for midget and below, you're going to pick your team, and you're either going to be 8 righty, 10 lefts. You're going to go 9 and 9, or you're going to go 10 and 8. Whenever that number on whatever side is, and depending on where you're at, you could be 11 and 4 in some situations if you're only picking 15 players. You got to get really creative in how you do things when you have a low number. I would never go into a national championship with less than 8 players, because of those 8, some of them are going to be more defensive minded, and you don't want them on your power play. But if you go in too low in one particular hand or the other, you're going to put yourself or put your team, people get banged up, people get hurt. I mean, my best lefty and my best righty in the national championships in Saskatchewan for Bantam, they both went down. Other guys stepped up, and we were still competitive, but with them in, it would have made that much of a difference. But you lose one of each, you've got a roster that's locked. You can't really do much moving forward. And what we do know, back to systems, is Team Canada Hockey showed us that in, I think, 06 in Turin. They went for experience over skill, and in some cases the players that were playing those roles of, like, and I'm not a hockey guy, so I'm not going to pretend, but your 3rd and 4th line guys, or your grinders, your check line, and that sort of stuff, they were not, they were less likely to play those positions because they were on the first 2 lines in there. So you've really got to come up with a plan that works for you. What have you got? This one's really quick. You know, in the most recent U13, you go, okay, Daren, there's 40 players at this age. You got to pick 20. There could be, and it's your choice, but as I already mentioned, you could have a shortage of a righty or a lefty. You got what I describe as those grinders, lunch bucket guys that you love. You also probably going to have a couple cringers, right, that are a little bit, you know, afraid of the contact and a little uncomfortable. And in some cases, you're maybe rotating a goalie through each week is a little bit different. You're fortunate if you can get your hands on a quality goalie or have a great goalie, because everything starts with goaltending. The next one is just on depth chart. So regardless of the level, Jacksonville coach was on JM3, I believe, and he talked, like, he actually on his practice plan, John Galloway,
And Galloway, yeah.
he has on his practice plan his depth chart. But Junior A with Richie Catton, Sheldon, and Ryan Keller, we got a board and we look at it all the time. And the example I'll give you in a second will define that. With the Berards at the senior level, you have to know where you are, and you do have to put them into categories, and this helps you in defining how you're going to pick your team. So this is just 2015. The 2016 year was the Berards went to the Mag Cup. As a general manager, this is a process we go through in January, pre-draft, and we do it after the draft based on who we get. But as you can see, the highlighted players are those that are committed to the NLL. So it's every GM's and head coach's nightmare when you're starting in May, but the NLL season is going into June. So these were potential challenges we were going to face. And some of my D-tranny right-handers were going to be playing offense or were calling up, but it allows us to see everything we've got on a depth chart by position, and then little details below. Players you still have that are injured or players that are on your protected roster. As you can see on the lefty D side, we were constantly looking to get, like O'Mara he went to Alberta. Joyce stopped playing but has come back to start playing. Creighton Reed was tied away, and then we had Miller, who is still playing in the league, but a young guy at the time, and then two veteran guys in Kevin Reed and Dane Michaud. And so at this particular situation, we were looking in the draft to try to get guys, but in order to build the Berards back to what it was, and credit to the crew and Lance Andre and Robbie and Dalzell and those guys that put this into action. We got Scigliano in 2014 that made a huge deal. Getting Benny Mack and Mallory, like, basically loaded our offense through the draft. And sometimes you have to be patient with that. Too many times you get pressured or get rushed into trying to make a decision, and you miss out on those opportunities, or you force yourself in and lose a draft pick. Case in point, when Mark Matthews gets traded to or his draft pick gets traded and ends up being for a first pick overall for Saskatchewan for Iannucci, which at the time it made sense. They probably felt that they were never going to be there, but it cost them 2 first-round picks, and for the next 2 years, the Sask team picked very high. So a great young guy that I have interacted with in the last couple of years here helped bring this to fruition for me, and his name is Mitch Cavallaren. And when we're running our evaluations, there's still, when you pick for a high level team, you're never going to make everybody happy. The parent of the kid that you cut is going to want details, and these are just some examples of things you can do to eliminate excuses or to be fair, but it's still going to come down. It's subjective. It's going to come down to your decision, but this will give you an example of a few things. So as I mentioned previously, you as a coach and your staff are going to spend the longest time with the final picks for your team, whether that's 3 or 3 to 5 players. You're going to spend the longest time deciding, okay, who is going to fit in? What else can they do? I see them as this. What else is in their toolkit, which I mentioned earlier? Blind evaluation. So you get your evaluators, they come in, they have no connections to the team. That's ideal. But you only give them a sheet that has the number and the color of the player. No name. It's not hard to figure out with the helmets, stickers, and the shorts, but they are just a number. Now, the parents aren't going to know this in the crowd because they're going to assume that you have the player name beside the number, but this is an example of what Team BC has done for years, particularly in our zone tryouts where you're just a number and a color. And previous to the evaluation, the head coach of that zone would divide the teams up equally as best they could. And it's never a perfect science, but this at least gives those first initial shot, first hour of a 3-hour tryout, and then you can share that stuff at a later on in the session. The more evaluators, the better. What if we go to that system that one of the people asked about pointing or check system, or 1, 2, 3, whatever you're using, if you are using that and there's a debate like the one below where you're ranking them either a 1, a 2, or a 3, 3 being out, 1 being you're in, and then the coaches that would hear this at a later date, but whether a high 2 or a low 2, right? So we're almost in a 4-point scale, but we don't want to make that commitment to move that 2 right to the top. They're kind of a mid 2 or a low 2, but 3s are out. They're in your tryout, and this job is cutthroat sometimes and unfortunate. You've got to be hard on how that rolls. Sometimes that doesn't seem fair, but we will continue to make decisions based on our heart and our head. And in most cases throughout my time, I've rarely made a heart decision. It's usually what's going to be best. How can I be unbiased in my decision? So these are just a few little examples of how the ranking system you could use, which I can provide you at a later date. They're not really hard to figure out. Just put your rights and your lefts, and they have a number and a color, and they're attached to that. So this is the last slide, which could take the majority of it, but what can you do at your tryouts to try to help with this situation? So we have the top point, or the top skill, speed, and athleticism. They show up really fast, but for me, I want to analyze or assess their lacrosse IQ. So I need, as a tryout person, just show up and play isn't good enough for me. Does it happen at tryouts sometimes? You do some basic drills and then you just throw them in a game and then you evaluate how they play in a game. That's fine. But when you're comparing apples to apples, the stronger players are going to still dominate the weaker players. You got a 80-player tryout or a 60-player tryout. Those veteran or better skilled players will always, they can find the weaker players to dodge on. They're knowledgeable and all that sort of stuff. So we have to figure out ways to be more creative in what we're looking at. First one I talked about is fast breaks from standing position versus what I call unorthodox. So in a game situation, we've all done the drill. 2 goalies throw a pass to midfielders, and the righty attack and lefty attack. If they were like me, they're portlier guys that kind of find the low spot, and the high attackman can move with both hands and is a good feeder, but we're always in that standing position. The fast break, the D guys don't have a chance because they haven't had to move. So what I suggest is you stretch 3 cones to areas on the field where on that same whistle that's starting the play, the player's got to move. And the D, it's great for the D. They got to get in first and then slide to help. And offensively, they got to do more than one thing. So they got to run. They got to see what's coming up. They got to know what position to get in. They can't jam. If they're both right-handers, they can't jam the next guy. We need a clear point man and all of the variations that go from that. A dodge your feet or shooting drill. So again, I can draw this up for you if you need it, but you're at at X or at the edge of the 6-yard box on most soccer fields that we're sharing fields with, and you start your dodge. And part of that dodge is that you got a defender checking them. There's your one-on-one, and then they have to feed a shooting line. So put 2 cones up, kind of 15 yards out or 12 to 15 yards out, and put a defender in between with 2 offensive shooters. That defender on the whistle goes and takes one of them away, and then it allows the one guy to get the ball and to shoot. You can do it with tennis balls, you can do it with regular balls, but the key is that if it's a true attackman, they got to be able to dodge, free their hands, find the man, follow through, and throw an accurate pass. So it's more of the dodger feeder part than it is about the shooting, but you can incorporate that into your trial. And the last one is what I call a survivor drill. There's like we do this in box, and when we're ragging it, killing off a penalty, and whether you're running the 30 or not, the mentality is no different. You got to possess the ball to kill some time, and you're being pressed all over the floor. The D's trying to probably press you in a corner. They're right out in your face, and for the first 20 seconds, you cannot shoot. One, you don't want to reset the clock and get a turnover and give the defensive group's power play the chance, but you're going to get out there and you're going to press on the ball, so you work on stick protection. You got to free your hands. So whether it's box or field, you can confine an area, get pressure on them, and make those challenges or situations even harder. Continuous drills of OD or on ball, off ball, and I'll give you an example of one with we call it a true north drill. I asked Merrick Thompson a couple years ago, like, what do we call this? But essentially, it's your offense and defense are playing each other, and you have a color coding however you want. You can do it all. Like if you have 8 poles, which most of us don't, you can do it that way, but you got to designate 2 what would be defensive players to play with the poles. And you have a 3-on-2 that starts from X. Many of you have seen this before. It's a 3-on-2. And you have 2 lines of the next drill, which are waiting and not a part of it. So the 3-on-2 happens. The same 3 guys that just played offense jump in they have to form a triangle, and they go against two defensive guys, plus the 2 that were in the drill. So it's a 4-on-3. And then we start again, 3-on-2, 4-on-3, 3-on-2, 4-on-3. And you can switch after a period of time. Kids love it. You get both, as every coach wants with a pole, they have to be able to handle the ball. If it hits the ground, whatever your criteria, you blow it down. It usually starts with a save. It builds energy, and it's fun. And the last one, another a great presentation from Coach Stagnita was just about creating what we call unfair or creating stress or duress. And he describes, what he's describing are these pro players, but you want to create a double drill. So just like the survivor drill that I spoke of, where there's always an extra body for defenders and it challenges your offense. So they've got to, turn away from pressure, like draw the double, turn out, throw a quality pass, or higher level stuff like hiding their eyes, throwing a fake to make the right pass. Like defenses are trying to anticipate all the time. So these are ways that we need to challenge these athletes, because when you're just doing the same drills time after time, you're not really going to learn anything about, especially those that can adapt their play to adjust. And without a doubt, the best way of controlling or not having as much control and challenging your kids is playing at an older level. Like we've gone down, and unfortunately the way the US tournament rules are, if you're a 9th grader, it doesn't match up well with how we do things in Canada by birth year. And we're going down some years, and it's first or 1 or 2 years difference. In some cases, a slower moving, a 3-year older kid is playing in what would be the 9th grade or the junior division. Those are the times where you get the true value of what a kid can, regardless of the reclassing, and they have September birthdays and all. When you get down and that struggle group through the 9th or 10th grade, we usually catch up and exceed things by the time they get to their junior and senior year. But that is where you're going to truly find out who can play or who's going to adapt their play to play at the next level. So there's no perfect way of doing it. You are kind of in competition. You got to go searching for it. But we're so focused on trying to go to tournaments and win that we're sandbagging and dropping our, we're winning the tournament, but what are we gaining for development? And I know that's a constant battle. Like, oh, we went to a tournament, we went 1-4. Well, 1-4 and you lost a whole bunch of close games, you're going to have more development and more to benefit from. So one of the things that I've strived to do and we constantly talk about is like the lower number of BC players that make the junior national team. Like, I've been there, I've watched it. We don't perform well enough to knock off Ontario type players. We got to make some changes. And part of that is, as a coaching group, is creating scenarios where we're better players than, and putting them in a scenario where when they get to those tryouts, it's like practice. It's not hard because they're used to it, but we're at the stage we're at, we're a little bit behind, and we need to get better. And by going down to U13 this year, that's the thinking, is that next wave, we're hoping to make a difference on. Last one is bring it on, if there are.
There are. So it goes back to dealing with parents, actually, is how do you deal with the youth parent who becomes incessantly involved in the evaluation process?
Now, we sometimes get this when, like, the division manager is usually a mom on the team. You just got to be, they know what is expected. They know what you're trying to do, but you have to be firm and be fair and isolate yourself from them and treat them like get away, define, if there's a section in box lacrosse, like there's an area where you want your coaches, evaluators to be, you tell every parent up front, I need everybody to not be in this area so we can speak freely, blah, blah, blah. When it's in there's no perfect way of doing it. I unfortunately have to deal with this from time to time as an elementary principal, where you've got parents that have perspectives. If they're a former player, it's usually a little bit easier, and you're probably not dealing with them. It's the ones that have never played and they're living vicariously through their kid. And I know when people are brown nosing or like, oh, hey, getting all fresh with you and being your friend, like those are those same people will connect with you at a later date if it's a true friendship. But if you're noticing your kids getting invited to more birthday parties than normal, close to tryouts, there's those people that are going to try to manipulate things. But you've got to be clear on what your expectations are. You've got to have quality notes, and you've got to be able to defend yourself with and people ask for feedback. I give them a paragraph. This is what I see. And so the more info you give them, sometimes people would argue that that's not a great way of handling it, but the more info I get them, and I'm talking about like a hand position on a stick and the quality, the depth of pocket, like the detail, other than your stick skills are not what everybody else is. You're mechanical for these reasons. It goes a long way, and it will shut those parents up pretty quick.
Okay. How and maybe when do you start to evaluate leadership potential or groups within individuals?
Great question. So I don't name the captain until it's probably like in a box season. You do your tryouts, you have your preseason practices, you might have an exhibition game or not. I don't normally name the captains until after the second or third game of the season. And you can rotate it however you want, or move it around, or just designate, put the tape on to do that. And I do it for a couple of reasons. I do include the player opinion, which you go through a process, your manager can coordinate it, or one of your assistant coaches, or you do it yourself, where you try to get a sense of who the players think are. But in the end, you gotta, you know, who you're like, you're gonna have certain criteria for your captain. Like, they should have the ability to understand the game and go speak to an official if they have to. That might be part of it. For me, your captain has to be, you know, close, like the gritty or the tough guy, you know, the guy that, you know, nobody will mess with sometimes, but more on the side of that, the grit factor and of strong character, where they're never going to cost you, other than taking an unfortunate penalty from time to time. But your captains, who you pick for your assistants or your positionally, like for field, is a little bit different, but you can get the influence of the players, but sometimes, in my opinion, they're way off, right? What their perception is of what hard work is, and depending on it's going to go to the popularity contest. So that's the coolest kid. So I think you got to be really careful, and you will include maybe their top vote, but there have been times where the top vote doesn't jive with what the coaching staff thinks. But I would wait until at least you have a sense of what they're, particularly a team you go to that you don't know anybody and you're new to them. You got to wait and see. It provincially, pretty easy. You know, the captain of JDF and the captain of Coquitlam, and it's easy to already figure out what other teams think. That makes it a little bit easier, and you can sort of pick it maybe before you play.
So next question is, players that have been drafted into the NLL have worked all their lives to get there. There's obviously a downside, as not everybody can make the team. What does the release process look like, and what suggestions are given to the players? And that's a tough question, and it's going to have a multitude of answers.
Yeah. So the collective bargaining agreements changed. For sure that what it used to look like was, if you were cut from the team and were offered a practice roster spot, you were a free agent and you could find other places to go. The structure now is that there's some play back and forth before you can protect what would be practice players. They're paid a lot better than they were in previous years, but they're going to go to a tryout. They're going to get potentially 2 or 3 weekends to show their thing. They're going to get into a game scenario. It might be a split squad game where, you know, the star players are there, particularly if it's at home. They're there for the first half, but not for the second half. But the process that goes on at, say, the WLA or in Ontario, very similar. Like, you have big rosters that you can move players in and out. The NLL is the best. You're fortunate if you're a first or second round draft pick. It's very unique. Like, we've been lucky. Like, Johnny LaFontaine was a 3rd round pick. Mitski was a 3rd round pick, and you get those guys that make your roster and maybe surprise a few people because they didn't know who they were. But it is, and it's a tough go. Like, it is attractive and fun to be a part of it, but like, the wear and tear on those bodies, getting on planes and flying, and I mean, who knows how soon we're gonna get back to flying again. But it is a tough grind, and the commitment on players to work independently of their team, get on their conference calls during the week. Those teams that come in from all over, it makes for, sometimes it's like, if you're local, it makes a difference for you to be a part of a team. Your 3rd goalie is preferably living in a house with other players there. So there's benefits to moving to those cities than there is being a commuter, because you cost more money.
Okay, and you know what, we promised an hour, and we're approaching that. There's one last question here before we wrap up, and we're switching gears. We're over to field lacrosse here. So with Canada being so wide geographically, how do you, or is it possible to compare players from different areas, or do they attend the same tryouts? So I'll let you answer that because I actually not familiar with the tryouts.
Yeah, no, it's 4 o'clock out here. I can keep going. I don't want to mess with people's dinner times, but like keep them flying if there's more than that. But in a former model that we used to have is there was a Western camp, there was like a Prairie camp, and there was an Eastern camp. So what's changed is the ability for the use of like highlight video. You can get a sense of who players are. We created a spreadsheet with the junior national team, and each player had a link to their huddle or wherever their YouTube page is that shows their highlights. The model that I think is the best way to go is, if we could, and it's all about cost, but having an actual tryout where you're in person, and I see the pros and cons to both, but cost-wise, to bring a couple coaches in, it's not that challenging. In this last round, Coach Matt Brown, the head coach, went to Kelowna and watched the national championships to get a sense of the players at that level. I hear you. In your Nova Scotia, your Quebec, outer portions of Ontario, out of like the hotbed areas, we have similar challenges like Victoria, Nanaimo, Lower Mainland, and then we have players in the interior. So I get what's being said. What we're seeing more of now are players in those rural areas are going to play in lacrosse academies, or getting opportunities for that. There's no perfect science for it. What I trust is that the coaches have seen, like I talked about the comparisons of what to expect from Team USA. They have seen what is in BC already, through BC's Best, or through it's a camp they have in Victoria run by Daren Reisig and Chris McKay. They've gone to Alberta and been a part of so the players that are coming up, what I would suggest, if you're not in one of those areas, is find a way to get noticed, find a way to connect with the All-Canadian Games, find a way to connect with a team that gives you those opportunities. It's not about, it really, for me, I think it's just about sheer volume, right? You want to get as many players as you can in that region, and there are some that are on the outside, and it makes it challenging. But when you get that chance to compete, the reality, unfortunately, is in our rural areas or less populated associations, they do come with a set of mechanics or a skill level, or that you're a one-on-one and you pack the ball and you score 4 goals, where they have to adapt to what the system is running. They cannot do what they want to do, but the more they can pick up on how to develop as like a team offense or team defense, that's the part. But we can pull from all over. But the reality is the one good player or the 2 good players from a particular area may or may not get the chance to they come to camp, but they're not going to be as noticeable because they're either at the same level or they're not better than that level. So therefore they don't get it. But I know from a national team perspective, we need to do a better job of getting players from each region versus it being, dominated one way or the other. But the reality is Ontario has more people, has more skilled players, has the Hill Academy, and then the great things that Edge Lacrosse has done. So there are better skilled, and the sheer volume in Ontario outdoes the other regions. And
Right.
The only thing we can do is build from our own.
Right. You know what? I was going to end it for you, but really interesting question came in because it's something we talked about in Israel lacrosse as well. But with the U19s in Limerick 2020 now being in 2021 and allowed to be U20s, will Team Canada reevaluate or retrial as circumstances and development change, or is the team the team?
Well, I am not going to speak for Brownie and the team, but what I do know is we had not finalized things. There was a scheduled camp here coming up, actually, where we were going to have what would be the top 35 or top 40 housed out of here in Burnaby and put them through a weekend to make those final decisions. One thing I think that is fantastic, and whether a player had a bad tryout or not, if they went and played, again, bad example, but they finished their Div 1 season and had a fantastic year, though they may not have originally been in the plans, they're going to get that chance again. So we currently don't have the final roster picked. The date and when it is unfortunate for me because it's right in the middle of school, but the July date was ideal. I get the logic behind it. I didn't want to have two competitions at the same time, but we're in a better situation, I think, than the US, but I'm sure the US will change guys out. But we've got a pool of players that are still to be decided, and we've got a mandate to try to put the best team out there. And sometimes those decisions are going to be made in the fall here versus closer to the date.
Awesome. Listen, Friggy, we're gonna wrap things up. I need to thank our sponsors real quick before we do so. So Major Series Lacrosse, Bear Paw Lacrosse Events, Sticks and Picks Podcast, Manitoba Lacrosse, Franklin Par Team, Uncommon Fit, and Apex Lacrosse Events. Listen, Friggy, that was outstanding, man. Some great information there to pass along to all people that were in the audience. Great questions. Some of them I was kind of cringing even asking because
no, it's fine.
I'm running them through my head.
I can just say no. Say no.
So everybody have a great night or afternoon or evening, wherever you might be. We're back at it on Tuesday. And Friggy, thanks again, man. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
Love it. Thank you.